welcome back to our channel, your ultimate destination for the deepest dives into the thrilling world of Genoa City. Today is a spectacular day to unpack the explosive drama, shifting alliances, and psychological warfare currently gripping our favorite characters. Grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let us explore the dark, twisted corridors of power and paranoia on the young and the restless. The landscape of Genoa City is currently a treacherous battlefield of shattered alliances, stolen legacies, and deeply buried psychological traumas bubbling violently to the surface. At the epicenter of this impending cataclysm is Diane Jenkins Abbott, a woman who has spent decades perfecting the art of survival through manipulation, deceit, and calculated reinvention. However, the April 21st episode of The Young and the Restless delivered a masterclass in psychological foreshadowing, courtesy of an unexpected and highly volatile source, Patty Williams. The intense, chilling confrontation between Patty and Diane has set the stage for what promises to be one of the most destructive character unravelings in the modern era of the show. This encounter was not merely a passing argument, it was a profound, prophetic warning that threatens to redefine the very fabric of Diane's existence and the safety of everyone in her immediate orbit. To fully understand the gravity of this confrontation, we must first examine the precarious pedestal upon which Diane Jenkins Abbott currently stands. Diane has recently executed one of the most ruthless and devastating betrayals in the history of the Abbott family. Through a labyrinthine series of deceptive clauses buried deep within a blindly signed prenuptial agreement, Diane orchestrated a masterstroke of financial and emotional terrorism. She secretly transferred the deed of the ancestral Abbott mansion entirely into her own name, subsequently ambushing a devastated Jack Abbott with a team of lotters and an immediate eviction notice. This was not just a legal maneuver, it was the calculated desecration of Jack's legacy, stripping him of his home, his dignity, and his family's history. Diane believes she has won the ultimate victory, claiming the mansion as her personal headquarters and cementing her dominance. Yet, it is precisely this illusion of absolute control that makes her current psychological state so incredibly fragile. When Patty Williams crossed paths with Diane, the tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of decades of shared history and mutual instability. Diane, operating from a place of supreme arrogance and brewing paranoia, immediately went on the offensive. She aggressively accused Patty of being an active participant in Victor Newman's heinous kidnapping plot, attempting to project her own fears and insecurities onto the notoriously unstable woman. Diane's strategy was clear: marginalize Patty by weaponizing her history of severe psychiatric struggles. Diane loudly and cruelly asserted that despite Patty's claims of recovery, she was still as profoundly ill and broken as she had always been. It was a classic narcissistic defense mechanism to attack the vulnerability of the accuser to deflect from one's own owning sins. However, Patty Williams did not react with the chaotic, unhinged energy that has so often defined her tragic past. Instead, she responded with a hauntingly serene clarity that completely disarmed Diane's aggressive posture. With the piercing insight that sometimes only the truly broken possess, Patty looked right through Diane's designer wardrobe, her stolen mansion, and her fabricated persona of the reformed, loving wife. Patty surgically dismantled the fairy tale life that Diane has so desperately tried to project to the residents of Genoa City. She acknowledged the beautiful masks Diane wears, the pristine image she attempts to uphold, but she also zeroed in on the unmistakable, jagged cracks beginning to form in that very facade. Then came the line that sent a collective shiver down the spines of the audience, a line that will undoubtedly serve as the thesis statement for the next major chapter of The Young and the Restless. Patty looked Diane dead in the eye and delivered a chilling prophecy, and when it crumbles, which it inevitably will, you will be far more dangerous than I ever was. We must pause to deeply analyze the terrifying weight of that statement. Patty Williams is a woman whose history in Genoa City is written in blood, chaos, and profound tragedy. Her obsessive love for Jack Abbott and her deep-seated traumas have led her to commit acts of extreme violence, manipulation, and psychological terror over the years. For a woman with Patty's dark, violent resume to look at Diane Jenkins and predict that Diane will be far more dangerous, the implications are nothing short of apocalyptic. Patty is acknowledging a fundamental difference in their darkness. Patty's past actions, while devastating, were often driven by untreated mental illness and a desperate, shattered heart. Diane's darkness, however, is rooted in a cold, calculating narcissism and a bottomless well of ambition. If Diane's calculated control shatters, the resulting explosion of unhinged, sociopathic rage will be untethered by any moral compass or emotional restraint. The cracks that Patty astutely observed are already widening into massive, structural fissures. Diane is currently spinning an impossible number of plates, and the psychological toll is becoming evident. She has completely ruined Jack Abbott financially, buying up his debts and turning him into a puppet, only to realize that in destroying his power, she has alienated the very man whose love she claimed to desire. Furthermore, Diane recently orchestrated a highly reckless and dangerous stunt by faking a car crash and attempting to frame Nikki Newman for attempted murder. This desperate act of framing Nikki reveals a woman who is no longer operating with her usual strategic patience. She is making impulsive, high-risk moves driven by deep-seated jealousy and a terrifying realization that the Newman Empire is mobilizing against her. The ultimate catalyst for Diane's impending psychological collapse is the evolving dynamic between Jack Abbott and Nikki Newman. After being brutally evicted from his ancestral home by the woman he trusted implicitly, Jack was left completely shattered, a broken patriarch wandering the emotional wasteland of his own making. In his darkest hour, he sought refuge and solace in the familiar, comforting presence of Nikki Newman at the athletic club. Nikki, who has spent years warning Jack about Diane's true nature, did not gloat. Instead, she offered genuine empathy and a fierce, protective vow to use the full power of the Newman machine to help Jack reclaim his life and exact justice. For Diane, witnessing any form of intimacy or emotional alliance between Jack and Nikki is the ultimate psychological trigger. It represents the total failure of her grand design. She wanted to isolate Jack, to be his only savior and his only master. Instead, her cruelty has pushed him directly into the arms of her most hated rival. As Diane observes Jack and Nikki plotting against her, the walls of her stolen mansion will begin to feel like a prison. The jealousy, the paranoia, and the terrifying reality that Victor and Nikki Newman are coming for her will create a pressure cooker environment in her mind. Patty's prophecy is not just a guess, it is an inevitable psychological trajectory. When Diane realizes that she can never truly have Jack's heart, and that the entire city is turning against her, the fairy tale will violently crumble. This brings us to the immediate, terrifying danger currently facing Patty Williams. In the world of soap operas, a character who accurately predicts a villain's downfall often paints a massive target on their own back. Patty has committed the ultimate sin in Diane's eyes. She has seen the truth. She has looked past the glamour and the power and identified the frightened, dangerous monster hiding beneath. Diane cannot allow someone like Patty to wander around Genoa City planting seeds of doubt or exposing her psychological fragility. As Diane's grip on reality loosens, she may decide that Patty is a loose end that needs to be permanently tied off. The prospect of Diane Jenkins actively seeking to eliminate Patty Williams introduces a deeply dark and thrilling potential storyline. If Diane crosses the ultimate line from financial manipulator to cold-blooded murderer, it would completely alter the landscape of the show. We must consider how Diane would execute such a dark deed. Given her history, she would not act overtly. She would likely attempt to orchestrate a scenario that leverages Patty's history of mental instability, making a murder look like a tragic suicide or a fatal accident resulting from a psychiatric episode. Diane would use Patty's past against her, ensuring that the Genoa City Police Department, and even Patty's own brother Paul, might view her demise as the unfortunate, inevitable conclusion of a deeply troubled life. However, covering up a murder in Genoa City is never a simple task, especially when the Newman family is already heavily scrutinizing your every move. If Diane were to harm Patty, the resulting cover-up would require her to spin an even more complex web of lies, accelerating her descent into total madness. The sheer panic of maintaining a murder cover-up while simultaneously fighting off Nikki Newman's corporate and legal attacks would be the exact scenario Patty predicted, Diane becoming a coroner. Lethal animal, far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Yet, as seasoned fans of The Young and the Restless know, the most obvious path is rarely the one taken. We must explore a highly compelling, beautifully ironic alternative scenario. What if Patty Williams' life is not actually in danger? What if Patty, recognizing the sheer toxicity and impending danger of Diane Jenkins, decides to strike first with a brilliant, devastating frame job? Consider the poetic justice of Patty Williams faking her own death and meticulously planting evidence to ensure Diane Jenkins Abbott takes the fall for her murder. This narrative choice would be a stroke of absolute genius from the writers, drawing upon decades of ritual history. Longtime viewers will vividly remember that Diane Jenkins herself is famous for faking her own death years ago. In that legendary storyline, Diane orchestrated a massive deception that led to half the town, including Nikki, Victor, and Jack, being investigated as murder suspects. Diane caused immeasurable pain, confusion, and legal jeopardy for her enemies by playing dead. For Patty to utilize Diane's signature move against her would be the ultimate form of karmic retribution. Patty is highly intelligent, despite her struggles, and she knows the history of Genoa City inside and out. She knows that Diane is currently acting erratically, making enemies of powerful people, and displaying a terrifying lack of impulse control. Patty could easily stage a violent struggle, leave behind compelling forensic evidence linking Diane to the scene, and then vanish into the shadows. If Patty were to successfully execute this fake death frame job, the consequences for Diane would be catastrophic and immediate. Diane is already walking on thin ice, with the authorities following her fake car crash involving Nikki. If she is suddenly implicated in the brutal murder of a vulnerable woman like Patty Williams, the walls would close in instantly. Jack, already deeply betrayed by the theft of his home, would view this as the final, horrifying proof of Diane's monstrous nature. Nikki and Victor would use their immense resources to ensure Diane is locked away without bail, using their media influence to destroy whatever remains of her reputation. In this scenario, Diane would find herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. She would be screaming her innocence from a jail cell, but no one would believe her because her entire life has been built on a foundation of lies. The irony of Diane Jenkins, the woman who once faked her death to torture her enemies, going to prison for the fake death of someone else, is a narrative masterpiece waiting to unfold. It would force Diane to experience the exact same helplessness and terror she has inflicted on others for decades. Furthermore, this storyline would allow Patty Williams to transition from a tragic victim to a brilliant, albeit twisted, mastermind. By disappearing and letting Diane take the fall, Patty would be protecting Genoa City from the very danger she warned about. She would be neutralizing the threat of Diane Jenkins not with violence, but with a perfectly executed psychological trap. It would be a fascinating evolution for Patty's character, proving that her time away has honed her strategic mind, allowing her to outplay one of the most notorious manipulators in soap opera history, regardless of which path the writers choose, whether Diane truly snaps and harms Patty, or Patty brilliant frames Diane. The emphasis Y&R has placed on this specific confrontation is undeniably significant. The dialogue was too sharp, the performances too intense, and the historical context too rich for this to be a throwaway scene. The writers are explicitly highlighting the dangerous, unstable road that Diane is currently traveling. They are telling the audience to prepare for a seismic shift in Diane's character arc, moving her from a calculating corporate thief to a desperate, unhinged threat to public safety. As we analyze the broader implications of Diane's impending breakdown, we must also consider the collateral damage. Jack Abbott is currently in a state of profound emotional shock, but if Diane's actions escalate into violence or murder, Jack's shock will morph into an unbearable, soul-crushing guilt. He championed Diane. He alienated his siblings, Ashley and Tracy, to defend her. He ignored Nikki's warnings. If Diane's hands become stained with blood, or if she is exposed as a violent sociopath, Jack will have to reckon with the horrifying reality that his blind devotion enabled a monster. This realization could permanently break Jack, fundamentally altering his role as the patriarch of the Abbott family and potentially leading to a massive, dark reinvention of his own character. Nikki Newman, on the other hand, will feel a grim sense of vindication, but even she may be unprepared for the sheer chaos an unhinged Diane could unleash. Nikki is accustomed to fighting corporate battles and engaging in sharp-tongued social warfare. Dealing with a woman who has completely lost her grip on reality and is operating without moral boundaries is an entirely different kind of war. If Diane feels she has nothing left to lose if she realizes the mansion, the money, and Jack's love are all slipping through her fingers, she may decide to take her enemies down with her. Nikki, as the woman currently comforting Jack, would undoubtedly be at the very top of Diane's hit list. The brilliant complexity of Patty's warning lies in its absolute certainty. When it crumbles, which it inevitably will, Patty recognizes that Diane's current success is unsustainable. It is built on theft, coercion, and emotional abuse. A foundation built on such toxic materials cannot withstand the pressure of time, nor the combined wrath of the Newman and Abbott families. The collapse is coming. The only question remains, how much collateral damage will Diane inflict when the structural integrity of her lies finally gives way? Will we see Diane descending the grand staircase of her stolen Abbott mansion, completely detached from reality, surrounded by the ghosts of her past misdeeds? Will we see her desperately trying to wash imaginary blood from her hands as the Genoa City police kick down the doors? Or will we see her sitting in a cold interrogation room, desperately trying to prove that Patty Williams is still alive, while the entire town watches her finally receive her long overdue comeuppance? The Young and the Restless has masterfully positioned the pieces on the chessboard. Diane Jenkins Abbott has claimed the Queen's throne, but she is surrounded by enemies, haunted by her own paranoia, and cursed by the chilling prophecy of Patty Williams. The tension is escalating at a breathtaking pace, promising viewers an unforgettable saga of betrayal, madness, and ultimate retribution. As the days unfold, We must keep a very close eye on Patty Williams, whether she is a tragic victim waiting to be claimed by Diane's descending darkness or a brilliant strategist preparing to spring the ultimate trap. Patty has fundamentally altered the trajectory of this storyline. The countdown to Diane's narcissistic collapse has officially begun. The masks are slipping, the lies are unraveling, and the true, terrifying nature of Diane Jenkins Abbott is about to be unleashed upon Genoa City. We will be here every step of the way, analyzing every intense confrontation, every stolen glance, and every shocking twist as this magnificent drama reaches its boiling point. Stay tuned, because the real danger has only just begun.